Okay. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Country Soul Songbook Summit 2024. It is our fourth annual, and I'm really excited to have this conversation today with the team at Whippoorwill Arts. They're going to tell you a lot more about what they do, but I'll quickly just introduce who you're looking at, and then we're just going to dive into conversation. I'm super excited to talk about the ways in which Whippoorwill is, part of that ecosystem of arts advocacy, or really, it's not even art, it's like advocacy for artists and what we as artists do. And so to my, I don't know, my screen left, whatever it's my left hand, this is my left hand, but it might be like on the right of the screen, I don't know. That is Tiara Mir. Is that the right way to pronounce your name, Tiara?
Yara Mar.
Tiara Mar, I'm sorry. Tiara Mar. And what are your pronouns, Tiara?
They
They, them. Tiara Mar, they are an Oakland, California-based artist, curator, writer, percussionist, filmmaker, and lover of paying artists. And Gabriel, I never got your last name, Gabriel.
Block, B-L-O-C-K.
Block. What are your pronouns?
He, him.
He, him. Gabriel Block is an LA-based musician, guitarist, vocalist, college essay instructor, and servant of the people. And so, I caught little introductions to introduce you both for this conversation, but maybe we can start our conversation just by talking about that, right? About how many hats we're wearing, as artists. And it would be great to know from each of you how you, as someone who's an art, like a practitioner of art, right? Would love to hear just what your personal journeys have been from like being an artist to becoming an advocate for other artists. What did that journey look like for each of you? Tiara, do you want to start?
Yeah, definitely. I guess like I want to start in response to how you started this conversation and talking about how arts advocacy isn't always necessarily advocacy for artists. And so like
Yeah,
at Web and like that's so important because there can be so much money sometimes. I mean, not enough, not ever enough, but a lot of the money that goes into art, a lot of the time it doesn't even get to the artist making the art. Like that is really like the position that we're oriented around is advocacy for artists specifically, and how can we make that fit into the larger arts advocacy world. um my mom, I was raised by a working artist. My mom's a dancer, so kind of
mm,
just like witnessing that hustle, witnessing the joy, witnessing the exhaustion that comes with it has always been a part of my upbringing. Um and I think it is like exhausting to see how many different hats artists have to wear. A lot of artists are also teaching artists, they're performers, they're community builders, and that's like not even like the resonances of the work they do as healers, as cultural workers. Yeah, and so kind of like what brought me into this work is seeing what it was like, being raised by a dancer, what it's like for working artists, and then also really caring for like Black and Brown queer community and that network of artists that is so fundamental to culture bearing and who are often completely underpaid if they're paid at all, despite
yeah,
doing the transformative work that connects us as humans. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. Gabriel, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got to this moment?
Yeah, that was beautiful, Tiara.
So
And Kamara,
beautiful.
thanks for asking. Um, so yeah, it's been a little bit roundabout for me. I think I come from a musical family, but not necessarily my immediate family. Um, um, my extended family, my cousins, a couple uncles, were always playing music growing up, and uh, on both sides of my family, but especially on my dad's side, which is primarily Bay Area based. I grew up with like all of these really close knit communal gatherings with my extended family, and everybody played music. So it felt to me kind of like a language that I wanted to be able to participate in, to interact in that group space with everybody. So I guess right from a really young age, it felt kind of like belonging. And I've played guitar pretty much my whole life. I think partially trying to be able to participate and speak that language with people. I've always seen
Yeah.
that as like a way to connect with other people, because we all feel music. We all speak music somehow. But I actually, even though I was really active throughout most of my life playing in bands, making my own music, I when it got to, I went to college and actually didn't really I didn't really give myself the permission to go all in as a musician when I was in college. And so I was working in the music industry for a number of years after school, and just had always been, but really, um, it reached a point where I just realized that it wasn't enough to be music adjacent. I really needed to be one of the artists, one of the musicians doing it. It just wasn't. I just realized it was the only thing that was really going to feed me. And so I've done a lot of reflecting recently, because doing that, pursuing that is no joke, right? We all know it's not easy, and it does force you to wear a number of hats, whether you love those things, even though we may love all the things we do. It's a hustle.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I think it's really seamless, fitting in with this amazing team at Whippoorwill, because um, I wish growing up that there had been more support for musicians. I think a big part of that gets in the way of musicians who are lifelong pursuers of that art, and people who might necessarily not feel like they're able to do music full time, is because of um, the general lack of support that I think
Yeah.
is so prevalent. Even with, like
Yeah.
Tiara was saying, even with arts programs and arts funding, it's not necessarily something that artists and that musicians really get to reap the benefits of. So I'm proud to work, in this space to try and make this something that's more feasible, for
Yeah.
musicians and artists to do.
It's funny, like, or not funny, but something that really kind of hooked me in what you were talking about, Gabriel, is just the way you grew up, right? That like at Country Soul Songbook, we're always talking about how music is this thing that gathers people, and that kind of the forces of capitalism and patriarchy kind of took music out of that space, like took music out of its like really prime position as this place where music happens because people are gathered and celebrating, or people are gathered in mourning, or people are gathered in, all of these different, like as a part of culture, music is so much more than just like putting on a CD or a track or listening to something on Spotify, or, it's like, it's so much more than kind of what it's been slotted into in our culture. Um and that primal, and I always think of musicians as like, it's so easy in our culture to kind of look at musicians who are like have made it as like, oh, that's a professional musician, when like really the majority of musicians are still doing that basic culture work of just showing up where people gather, or like being the place where people gather, like on the ground. And it's such a, honestly, a working class job. And I think lots of artists, when we go into it, like almost speaking to what you said about like, going to, like, we get to college, it's like, oh, you want to work in music? Okay, then learn how to do something in the industry, because then you'll be able to have a job in music, right? And there's like, it's so bizarre that the actual making of music is so underpaid, when it's so like kind of inside the fabric of what like culture is, and so adjacent to all these other parts of culture, right? It's like this, it's a hub of kind of cultural activity. So I just found that really, really interesting, and even like kind of building that bridge where it's like at a most basic level, paying musicians is rebuilding that fabric. It's making it possible for for them to kind of keep being what music has always been, right? And I would love to hear about, and that aside thing is the reason I know about Whippoorwill is because I got a grant from Whippoorwill at a really critical juncture in my musical career where I had an album, I had no money to release it, and it was like I was just like, you know what, forget it. I don't even care anymore. I'm just gonna go do something else. I can't make a living. I can't support this thing, and that grant came at a critical juncture, and Whippoorwill, as far as I can tell, is the only granting organization that supports songwriters. I'm like, I believe me, I've written grants for all sorts of things, and there's like nothing out there really for songwriters and musicians that supports them. I mean, very, very, very few grant making organizations. So can you just tell us, maybe we start there, like what is Whippoorwill as a granting organization, and then how did that kind of bridge into, advocacy for artist pay and the other programs that you have spearheaded, really? I don't know who wants to
Yeah,
start with that, but
for sure. I'm down to maybe take the origin place, and then Gabe is like really the driving force of a lot of our programming. So I'll toss it over to him.
Give us the
Um,
origin story.
great.
so Kamara knows, but
Origin story.
um, so Whippoorwill and the advocacy work that we do now was kind of born out of witnessing how the pandemic affected musicians and just completely transformed the livelihoods of musicians, and kind of came from a place of wanting to break some of the mythologies attached to mythologies
I love
attached
mythologies. Yeah.
mythologies attached to what life is like as a working musician. Um, and so um, uh, Hillary and Jim, co-founders of Whippoorwill Arts, commissioned a national survey of roots musicians to
This is
really
Hillary Perkins and Jim
Nunnally.
Nunnally.
Yes, Hillary Perkins and Jim Nunnally, two working musicians who commissioned a national survey of working musicians, specifically in the roots genres, to understand how COVID was affecting their livelihoods. And everything we've done subsequently has been shaped by the priorities we identified of working musicians. So what it revealed was that there was so much existing inequity, so much existing stagnancy in artist pay and how artists are protected, that COVID really actually just kind of took the covers off of it, and kind of gave us an impetus to really think about how we can change the status quo of how music happens, especially how live music happens. And so what we found is that the top three priorities of working musicians are: first, guaranteed pay for a gig, which is just like
I know. It's ridiculous.
like performing music is labor and all labor deserves to be compensated. So you should be paid regardless for performing music. And another piece that came out in that survey is that a lot of the musicians we talked to have been being paid the same amount since the 1980s. The same amount of money for a gig since the 1980s, which if you live somewhere like the Bay Area, and also if you live anywhere, that's completely outrageous.
It's
Cost of living.
outrageous. It's like absurd. It's like I want to laugh with I want to guffaw with flabbergastation.
Yeah, like the absurdity of it.
Those fees were tough to begin with back then, but then you take into account inflation, rising costs. It's craziness.
Yeah. The second thing was consideration of expenses. So So guaranteed pay is kind of not enough, because a lot of the times, for a musician to play a gig, they'll actually have to pay a lot of money. You know, they have to
Yeah.
drive very far often, they have to pay for their lodging, they have to pay for gas, they have to transport heavy equipment. And so consideration of expenses is the second thing. And what is also attached to that is professional protection. So what we found is that discrimination in the hiring process for musicians is rampant. It's really severe. And we found that 70% of artists with disabilities report discrimination in the hiring process, and
As in,
that
like, you just don't get the gig because you have needs beyond like showing up to get exploited.
exactly, yeah, exactly. And then also that many 2/3 of musicians with disabilities don't even report that they have disabilities to kind of navigate that, and then end up playing in unsafe conditions for them. Um, and then the third one was opportunities to play for small listening audiences. So what that means is not every working musician, kind of like what you were just saying, are like
Yeah.
aspires to selling out a stadium. Like what that showed us is that musicians are really seeking meaningful and sustainable and like regular opportunities to perform for their local communities, that exist outside of like the venue, just the strictly commercial music
Mm,
space. And so those are the
wow.
two things that we found. And another thing that we found is like, and this is like something that as you were talking has really just occurred to me, is that like the highest that is actually their highest demand is opportunities to play for small listening demand audiences. So that even
Wow.
transcended like guaranteed pay for a gig, which I feel like just like really, shows how like musicians and like investment in musicians itself is sometimes so anti-capitalist. And like I think that's how like what comes forth in our grant making practices to musicians. What we've learned is like the best way for us to make investments into the music communities that we care about is literally to just give the money to musicians. Because
Yeah.
one thing about the musicians, they will not accumulate it, they will not save it like immediately. Almost every time we like give a grant to a musician, they'll immediately distribute it amongst their community. They will immediately use it, to pay someone's medical bills. They'll immediately use it to pay the local studio. They'll immediately use it to like pay a local engineer, pay a local engineer. So it's like such an effective way to just get money dispersed throughout a community, is to just
Mhm.
in the community.
Right. It's like we're like, "Ah, okay, great. Now I can invest in this art project." And it's always a group, it's always realizing that musicians are this hub of activity, right? Like you said, the local studio, there are other local musicians that they're playing with, like, and hiring. They're like, oh, now I can hire, like, now I can pay artists, right? I think
Exactly.
that's something, and it also, the third thing you said, Tiara, about wanting to play for smaller local audiences, right? It's like that it almost it just made me think like, as musicians, we kind of know our place in our community, right? And we
Yeah.
keep getting told by the culture that that's not viable, that's not feasible, that's not a job, that's a waste of your time, that's not making it, that's not success, that's not, and
Yeah.
it's all against our better instincts, right? But it's like, no, I belong here in my community, making music, bringing people together,
Yeah. Exactly.
right? Wow. So cool. Anything else? Do you want to bridge to some of your programming or
Yeah. I think since we're on the topic of like small listening audiences, I feel like would be a great time to talk about musical live, Gabe, if you wanted to, and then we can circle back to advocacy at some point.
That sounds great. Yeah, I feel like I'd be happy to talk about some programming at this point, but I think that was just really well conveyed, Tiara.
yeah.
And I think one of the like main points that we that I want to make sure we talk about is that Whippoorwill is a musician artist centric organization, and so like all of that, the origins that Tiara just mentioned, like everything that we do comes from wanting to give a voice to the musicians, to the musician community that we're a part of and
Yeah.
that we serve, hearing directly from musicians. And so those things that the survey illuminated, like that's giving a voice to, that was taken directly from musicians. So our programming
Yeah.
reflects the needs of our musicians directly. So talking about small listening audiences, one thing I'd like to say also, just to what Kamara, what you mentioned, is that, like, yeah, music is communal. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Music is inherently meant to be played for, shared with other people. It's meant to be this exchange. And so musicians wanting, basically above anything else, smaller, intimate, listening, truly appreciative audiences is pretty telling of that. Like, music is a
Yeah.
calling for musicians. And so with Music Alive, the community concert program, right, one of the programs that we offer, it was designed around all of those needs that musicians reported. So first of all, I mean, just as far as guaranteed pay goes, so Music Alive guarantees $200 per musician. These are 1 hour concerts, so it roughly equates to $200 an hour for each
Yeah.
musician. These are local, convenient concerts for musicians. So I'll start off by talking kind of big picture like this, and then
Yeah,
I'll go more
great.
into like the history of it. But yeah,
I
so
love
like
it.
at its core, right, Music Alive offers guaranteed pay of $200 per musician. These are local concerts that don't require extensive commuting to get to. They're in the musicians' community. They do not, these performances don't compete with the musicians' ticketed events. So let's say, you know, those events, those concerts that take place in the evenings, on the weekends, these concerts, they don't interfere schedule wise or with any clauses precluding a musician from being able to play in the area. And the other thing about this community concert program is that while we are a musician-centric organization, these concerts take place at agencies that serve traditionally underserved or marginalized communities, because this music is meant to be that sort of exchange. So these concerts are held at places like low-income housing facilities, senior centers, developmentally disabled care facilities, K through 12 public schools, places like that, where the folks there don't typically have access to this sort of high quality professional music. So what happens is the
Wow.
musicians get paid, right? Get paid fairly for this work, and so it brings the best quality music to people who, for whatever reason, whether it's for socioeconomic reasons, for disabilities, for whatever reason it is that might prevent somebody from really having the means to spend the money and spend the time and expend the effort physically to get to a venue.
Yeah.
This is a
Wow.
program that provides music as both a paid performance opportunity for the musicians and an experience, a communal experience for the audience members.
That's incredible. That's incredible. It's incredible. It's like every community needs one of these,
Yeah, and that totally. And so we, you know, I can jump in and talk a little bit about the history of the program too, if now's a
Yeah,
good time.
please. Yeah, tell us everything. Tell me everything. My mind's already like, my mind's already exploding with inspiration. It's just like that perfect fit of like, it's helping musicians like just be what they've always been in the community. Like it's building that bridge back. Amazing. Yeah, I want to hear everything.
Totally.
Tell me everything,
Totally.
Gabriel.
So the program was piloted in 2021, and throughout 2021 and into 2022, these concerts were taking place in San Francisco Bay Area, in Hawaii, and in Fort Collins, Colorado. So there were these three main locations where the program was piloted, and there were about 87 concerts that took place throughout that time. So I came on board in 2022, and around that time, Hillary and I were working together to basically, like, once the pilot program ended, we relaunched the program with a few tweaks, because as we've talked about, one of the core pillars of Music Alive and Whippoorwill Arts is equity booking, right? And making sure that folk, roots, musicians of all backgrounds are getting opportunities to play. And so we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just our friends or people who happened to find out about us were not the only
Right.
ones who were getting the opportunities. So what we did was we started we implemented the community booker role. So the community booker in each chapter or in each community that we're in is a working musician, someone who's already doing performances and is entrenched in their community, has a network of musicians, and is oftentimes doing these kinds of performances already. We brought community bookers on to help expand the network of musicians that were participating in Music Alive. So, and we used that as one of the ways to build really organic bridges and a presence in these communities. Because I mean, this program, Music Alive, is just, it's the musicians in these areas already doing the work, and we're helping facilitate it and make it viable. So Music Alive now exists in San Francisco proper, Marin County, the East Bay, Los Angeles, Nashville, and Fort Collins, Colorado. So throughout 2023, we over tripled, we more than tripled.
Wow.
The activity from the pilot program. So
I have two questions. My
Please.
first question is, how do you fund it? And then my second question is, how does a community get one? Like, I'm like, Durham needs this. How does a community involve themselves or like get their own chapter or whatever happening?
These are great questions. And it is not easy.
Funding,
we know, right? Funding is the gift that keeps on giving.
I'm like trying to figure out where do we get the money for it?
Yeah. So we are, yes, it is, it's a grind, but Music Alive has been funded through a combination of private donors and major gift contributions, but also we recently, over last year, were awarded a grant from the California Arts Council, which was really, really critical. But we're continuing to look at all avenues, both national, state level, local funding opportunities, along with private donors. So as far as how,
and are you trying to make it? Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Please go for it.
Well, is the goal to make it kind of a national network? Are you trying to stay kind of local to the West Coast? Are you trying to make it something that's where it's like, oh, we've got a template that you share? Like, what's that future vision look like?
We would love to have Music Alive present in every state, in every city. That's the long-term goal.
Wow.
And it's doable. That's one of the things, is we've got a really flexible program that's easily scalable. So to answer your second question initially, the way that communities get one, like we're trying to, we want to expand sustainably. I think it's really tempting to want to expand quickly, but funding is kind of one of those natural buffers that I think kind of forces us to pace ourselves. But it's kind of, what it comes down to is like all communities have musicians, right? So for us, it's kind of getting in touch with those musicians, but it's finding a community booker, somebody who who is active in their community, is kind of a community leader, and is doing this work. They become
who can kind of spearhead it in their community as well as be liaison to your org.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
That's exactly right. And so from there, it's
Everybody
kind
in
of,
Country Soul Songbook community, listen up, you know? Do you want to be a spearheader? Like, well, definitely we can put that word out to people when feels good for for expand for you know, expanding your beautiful tentacles.
that's amazing. Yeah, yeah. We don't have, we could never have enough tentacles. So, but yeah, send send everything over here to us. We'd love to chat. Um, but yeah, we do feel like it's a really scalable program, partially because we've worked really hard with a brilliant coder um, named Sophie Lee, who has helped us put together automation that basically what it does is like we have a system that limits the amount of labor that we as a staff need to put in,
Yeah.
because you know a big part of our mission as an organization is to make sure that 65% at least of our resources go directly to musicians. So for this program, it's a
Wow.
good example that we've established this workflow that creates and distributes paperwork, right? Facilitates payment, reminders, things like that,
Wow.
that make this work, that makes the program run really smoothly, and it's replicable. You know, this is
Wow.
it helps the model work in any community. But it's those main pieces, right, of having the community of musicians, a community booker, like you said, who's kind of like the boots on the ground to make things run. We, as an organization, with the community booker, establish connections to the local agencies, and that's really what the program needs to run, is identifying communities that really need the music,
Yeah.
and then connecting those communities with the musicians who are already doing all of the work.
Wow. It's so exciting, and I can already, it's like such a seed that's been planted, a sprout that's been nurtured, and like kind of the vine that's ready, like, you know, just about to kind of um disperse. So it's really exciting to just to talk, and thank you for that work. You know, I can't imagine how much actual just on the ground work that I mean, how long was the process? You know, I think it's funny, we tend to think of these like, oh, it's here, thank you, fantastic. But like, how long did it take you just like showing up for this project, for it to really, you know, from did you say you started did Music Alive spring from from the thing that Tiara was talking about, the
The survey.
the survey? Oh my gosh, I couldn't think of the word. Did it spring directly from that? Was it something that kind of sprung up at the same time? Like what's been the time arc of the work that you guys have been putting in around this?
It was that along with, I think, to my knowledge, you know, all of our programming was a direct response to the survey.
Wow.
So it was, a direct response to what musicians identified, you know, musicians in our community, but then obviously nationally too, right? All these musicians who Lori and Jim had never met before, were explaining that they needed. So, I mean, it's a work in progress. But Music Alive itself, has been in the works for like 2 to 3 years at this point, and we're still learning. You know, we really value musicians' feedback, our agency partners' feedback, audience members' feedback. So we're always tailoring it to try and, you know, serve our musicians and our audience members better.
Tiara, can you speak to that, and like, are there ways in which the fellowship that I was a part of, is that a separate thing? Is that something that dovetails with Music Alive? And are there other, like, seems like Music Alive is like a really one of the bigger programs, but do you have, like, tell me about the other programs that you guys are up to as well?
Totally. So Music Alive, like we were saying, is kind of these like opportunities that make life sustainable and meaningful for a working musician. So kind of like, you know, like $200 per gig per musician, which is pretty good pay. Another piece that came out of our survey was just recognizing how underfunded specifically roots music is, especially, and roots music being a wide wide,
Yeah.
as of course like is relevant to country song. Like that's part of the work y'all are doing, but just recognizing how underfunded roots music specifically is, and wanting to intervene in the way that really exceptional musicians are just hustling all the time. Um, the way that, going to gig, going on tour all the time, often cuts into the ability of an exceptional musician to actually just be creative and be exploratory and make work and release work. And so the fellowship was kind of birthed to, I mean, kind of like you said, offer something to musicians who are in a juncture in their in their creative path, who can really use the funding to like, create a project they've been sitting on. Um, you know, we've had folks use it to just like to invest into rehearsals with their band. Um, Folks like Pura Fey, Nina Gerber, who are incredible musicians who haven't been able to like produce albums in a long time because they've just been working. Give them the spaciousness, the time, the money to create something that they really wanted to for a while. And so the fellowship is like based on creating these like an amount of funding that is able to like help an artist in that juncture of like crossing a finish line or something, or starting something through. And that's like a big part of how we see also investment into the live music ecosystem changing. It's just really wanting like to treat the brilliant work that especially roots musicians do as like cultural work that is necessary for our communities, that we really need to invest into financially. And yeah, just like set a standard for how we believe like musicians should be treated. And along with Music Alive, like it's this is a type of programming that's like a model for us. So it's like an experiment that we started that like we would literally love for other organizations to take up the model and like reimagine what like serious investment into musicians can look like. And it is important. Oh yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Just like understanding that like grant money sometimes can be often more stifling when it's attached to like you must create this in this way and do this, and I think something that's been important for us, and like also from a perspective of like accessibility, and this year's fellowship program really prioritizes musicians with disabilities, is just making it flexible, like really wanting the musician to like have creative control, have it be in with where they are in their career. If the creativity is going this way and then this way, or if it's going this way, like whatever evolves and transforms and to emerge at the end as a fellowship project is what we want to see. Yeah.
Something came up as you're I can't remember what it was, but yeah, can you talk more about like who are the fellows this year?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So the fellowship is like one of my favorite parts of this job, because like it's just like incredible to like feel the energy of brilliant musicians meeting each other's minds, which is something that I got to experience like with Kamara.
because you bring us all together too to like interact, and yeah, it was I remember just the being a fellow was so great because you get to meet all of these musicians that you really don't cross paths with. I hadn't crossed paths with any of these musicians, and it was amazing to just get to interact and listen and commune, with other passionate artists in roots music, that make new friends. And it can be, we as musicians, we still tend to be in our local community, right? It's easy to be like, okay, this is my community. These are the people I'm taking care of and that take care of me. And so it's nice to pop out and I don't know, just like get fed a little bit from those outside interactions.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, definitely. I think our fellows this year, I hope to cultivate a similar experience for them. We have Galen Lee, who is an incredible fiddle player, based out of Minnesota. She's the co-founder of Ramped, which is a really incredible resource.
What is
And
ramped?
Ramped is the acronym is slipping. Recording the acronym is something, but it's essentially an organization resource advocating for musicians with disabilities.
Mm,
It's a list so that you can, if you want to hire a musician with disability, you can they have opportunities for them there, and they have advised many different organizations in the music industry, including the Grammys, about how to be more accessible. Um,
mm,
so Galen Lee is a co-founder of that. And yeah, of course, incredible fiddle player, like mind-blowing. And her project is to mix and release the original composition that she recorded for Macbeth on Broadway. And so
wow.
she's some training with Irish musicians in the Celtic tradition, and release that project and do and like an education piece alongside with that. Really interesting project. We have Drawn Blind Boy Paxton, who is an incredible, incredible, incredible banjo player, and just like a mind-blowing storyteller. I feel like watching him perform has been, I've never seen him live, but even through the screen, it's like very, very transporting. And he is on a project to learn how to build old American banjos. So his
Ah,
project instrument building project, old American banjos being like so, vital to the history of Black music in the US, and old American banjos are not manufactured so much anymore. So that's his project, is doing that cultural preservation work. We
wow.
have MGK, who is a incredible a country musician based in Nashville, with roots in El Salvador, and just like a very groundbreaking person who really wants to like um, reimagine what country music looks like, and kind of like do some of the mythology breaking work. She has just completed a record, and is using the fellowship to release, create a music video, and also practice with her band. And then finally, we have Abel Rocha, who is a multi-instrumentalist, with roots in Mexico, who really defies any kind of explanation of genre. Just extremely talented. We met him through our Super Folk Festival last year, which was a collaboration with Northwest Folklife. And his project is to do training with masters of instruments in 3 different cities in Mexico. So he's traveling there
Wow.
right now. He's going to come back and work on finishing a project with his band. Um, yeah, and
Wow.
they're all just like mind-blowing people, and like just witnessing the synergies that happen when they can connect with each other has been really fulfilling.
Well, it's like it again, it's like to kind of bring it full circle, right? Is that every person you described is doing more than just making their music.
Yeah,
They're like doing this, it's a and I think it's also that thing of like, what is it to be an artist in this world, right? It's like, as artists, we always get put into like, stay in your lane. I'm a musician, I'm a this, I'm a that. It's like, for artists, it's like we spread our passion onto all sorts of things. And it's really cool to hear like how much other than music they're doing too, that it's like maybe it's like we have to really, it's making me expand like the idea of like, oh, what is it to actually just be a musician, right? It's like, it's to be
totally.
able to play this thing and um amazing. Well, we're getting kind of toward the end of our time together. I don't want to keep you guys too long. I could ask questions forever, but are there any programs that we haven't covered, or that? And I would love to hear about how people can support Whippoorwill. Like, what are the best ways to support? Whether, is it to go to your website, and is there a donation link and things like that? But yeah, any ways that community, this, kind of virtual community, this ecosystem can support you, we want to hear about that.
Yeah. One thing I'd love to chime in with is a big project we've been working on for the past year that Kamara was super supportive of and advised us on, was recommendations for live performance pay and professional protections for working musicians. And so this,
Yeah.
it's a resource we created that we wanted to offer to all folks, all organizations who are interested in engaging ethically in the music industry. And if I can share screen, I can pull it up really
Yes.
for,
Oh my
like,
gosh, that would be amazing. Hold on. Yes.
ah,
Okay, there you go. I think you have permission.
okay, wonderful. Let me get it.
Yes.
Let's go,
Yeah.
Tiara.
Thank you, everyone. So many windows. Okay, so this is the document.
Wow.
And so what this offers is, so first we want to say that, like, this is our recommendation of minimum hourly base rate. But what this is a set of guidelines that should always be, considered in alignment with local cost of living. And also, this is what we think is a floor, like it's a minimum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's like a couple other structural things that I wanted to point out that I think make this something that is really possible for industry-wide shift incrementally to support working musicians. So the first one I would say is paying an hourly base rate. So what an hourly rate can do is really support musicians in getting paid for the amount of time that they're at the gig. Sometimes they'll have to be at
Yeah.
the like 7 hours and they play for 30 minutes and then they get paid for 30 minutes of play. But we really want to emphasize an hourly rate is really helpful in making pay rates more equitable. We also want to emphasize paying musicians per musician. So like instead of offering the band a solid, like chunk
Mm.
of pay, like considering hourly and then considering per musician again. And then the last piece that we've talked about a little bit is considering their expenses is really, really important. So how can you make it feasible for the musician to come perform your gig and not go back home in the hole, essentially?
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing
Wow.
that I really, really wanted to emphasize is the hiring of an access coordinator or a point person who is accountable to any musician hired's accessibility needs. And also just the taking of simple, effective measures to protect the musician's well-beings. All of these
Mm.
really emphasize uplifting musicians with disabilities, uplifting Black and Brown musicians, and also uplifting musicians who play from like a global traditional music perspective is really important to us. And again, the reason we offer this is because this is in alignment with our programming, and we really believe
Yeah.
that the organizations can adopt this. This is a model that we've tested, and this is a model that also this document features almost 19 document features 19 case studies of organizations who we see across the country doing these kind of experimental pilot programs that really shift
Mm.
the status quo of how artists are paid, and also what it means to pay artists fairly and ethically for their work. Yeah, and then
How can organizations access this?
yeah, so this is, I'll stop share if we're ready to. This document is on our website. You can go to Whippoorwill.
Yay!
Yeah, it's
Thank
open
you.
source. Our
Thank
vision
you.
for it to be like able to be incorporated into helping organizations change longstanding business practices, which is something that we've been able to do at Whippoorwill Arts in collaboration with folks wanting to shift how they engage with artists.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I'm like in whatever this was, like 45 minutes to an hour, like just getting the download of all the work you guys have been doing is blowing my mind. I mean, it's such a, it's like, I don't know, like I can feel in my body, I feel safer as a music, like, I just feel like there's been this groundwork laid for real care for artists. Like, it's kind of mind-boggling and like, whew, relief. Like, I feel relief in my body
Oh,
from this being, like, the scaffolding being there. Wow,
yeah.
wow.
Well, I feel like that is like so fundamental to what it is just like care that musicians deserve and need
Mm,
to continue caring for all of us. And there's another way, if folks are interested in tapping in, we're also kind of like opening this political organizing front of the work we're doing in collaboration with some local unions, the Richmond
wow.
Jazz Initiative. We have noticed that in cities across the country, there are prevailing wage ordinances that essentially advise a minimum wage that folks must be paid for a certain type of labor. And in no country, in no city across the country, are musicians included in this prevailing wage ordinance. So what that means is in
Wow.
no city is there like essentially a pay floor that musicians must be paid for their labor, which is kind of what we were talking about before. But we're working on a campaign in 4 Bay Area cities to include musicians in the prevailing wage ordinances in each city. This would not only set a pay minimum for a type of work, it would also advance professional protections, making sure that musicians of color, queer musicians, musicians with disabilities aren't discriminated against in hiring processes, and other professional protections that you can read about. Yeah.
Oh, it's like as flabbergasted as I was with like some of the statistics that you were talking about in like when you were talking about the survey. I'm like equally as flabbergasted as like with the amount of work you guys have, like the amount of scaffolding you've been able to build in just a few years.
Also, just
Wow.
a shout out to Hillary Perkins, who has really been like
Yeah.
the mastermind, like kind of piecing all these threads together from like
Yeah.
identifying musicians' needs to putting it into programming to turning that programming into another type of advocacy. Um,
Yeah. Thank you, Hillary. Thank
Yeah.
you.
A generous
Um,
mind and like Tiara said, just a brilliant weaver, connector of how all of
mhm.
these pieces can fit together.
Gabriel, does anybody or any closing thoughts? Do you want to speak to kind of what the vision for Whippoorwill is going into the next, it's the Pisces new moon. It's good for planting seeds. What are the seeds that Whippoorwill is planting for the year ahead, and where can we go find out more?
So you talking about scaffolding, right, with all of these the pieces that we're putting in place. I think the work that we're doing, both, while some of it on the advocacy front, you could say, like, might at sometimes feel cerebral, it's very practical. Like everything that we're
Mm,
doing works together. Um, for example, all of the programs that we offer, they are not just models of how to provide fair pay for musicians, and they're not just models for investing in musicians. They're also working as organizational tools, like organizing tools, because with the
yeah,
advocacy work that we're doing with like the city pay ordinances that Tiara just mentioned, a lot of the musicians who are involved are Music Alive musicians, right? So like with our programming, we are modeling how to take care of musicians by answering directly to what it is that they have directly said that they need.
yeah,
And as a result, we're so to answer your question, we're continuing to obviously invest in these programs, but we're also seeing these programs as ways to further organize our musicians because we're leading by example. This is how musicians can be cared for,
yeah,
um, and so I think it leads to these musicians getting involved, in the work that we're doing on an advocacy front pretty organically. Um,
yeah.
so it's
Yay,
it's it's a
great.
pleasure to work, for an organization where everything connects so seamlessly, so organically.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. I'm so grateful for you guys taking the time to to have this conversation. I'm sure, you know, that will be connecting in future and, oh yeah, do Whippoorwill, what's the website and, how can people donate if they want to support too?
Great question. The website is whippoorwillarts.org.
Okay.
And I believe that there are donate links that
Okay.
you can click.
Great.
We also take Venmo. Just gonna throw that out there. We are in the digital age. But thank you for asking, Kamara.
Yeah. I mean, you know, every penny counts and it feels good to help where people can. So, I just want to extend my deep gratitude for you both coming and having this conversation and sharing all of your work with the CSSB community, and can't wait to see what comes next and all the ways that we can weave more and yeah, weave more. Maybe that's next year's summit title will be Weave More.
We have, organizations have so many shared values. And so thank you for having us. It's been, such a treat to be able to chat with you. And thanks for all the thought and care that you've put into this conversation.
Yeah.
Love you.
And
Love you
also,
guys.
Kamara, you are someone who's visioning and thinking and wordsmithing has made all of this possible. So thank you for being part of
More
our
soon. More soon. Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
I'm gonna stop the video. Oh wait, nope, not stop my video. I'm gonna stop the recording somehow. And then we can say goodbye. For real.
Sounds good.